If the Colts truly are without their star quarterback for the rest of the season, then Sunday showed us what hurdles they're going to have to overcome for the final 12 weeks. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's up, everyone? Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. What's up, beautiful people? This is Jake Arthur, and that is Zach Hicks. You know, the two of us from horseshoehuddle.com. And today we're going to take you through the final wrap-up of the Colts 37-20 loss to the Jaguars. I'm sure we would all love to throw that one in the trash. But then we'll also look at what are the biggest issues facing this team after kind of another eye-opening performance like Sunday. And then, you know, for a lot of people, talking playoffs was premature, but the Colts were in the mix even in the early season. Is that realistic now? How does their playoff picture really shape out over these next 11 games, 12 weeks? So we'll go through all that with you. But Zach, first, hello. Sorry that is what you had to see when you watched the game. We've discussed it, but what really stuck out to you about that game?
Yeah, I don't think the Indianapolis Colts as a team played particularly terrible in this game. I mean, I know the score looks really bad. 37 points allowed is not a good thing, obviously, anytime you see that. But I think when you look at this, I think the game plan on offense wasn't too bad. I mean, they tried to counter the Jaguars stacking the box by throwing the ball a little bit more, which there were some open receivers. There were some shots down the field. There were some opportunities to create after the catch. And I think on defense, the Colts defense played fairly well, all things considered. I mean, they could have tightened it up a little bit more in the red zone, which was an issue in the first matchup with the Jaguars. But they held Trevor Lawrence to probably his worst game of the entire season. And for the most part, contained Calvin Ridley as well. So I think there were a lot of things on paper that you could have said, hey, the Colts should have won this game. But ultimately, you can't win when your quarterback plays like that. And I know in your post game, you kind of went in on Gardner Minshew. I know a lot of people are going in on Gardner Minshew about this. And part of it doesn't seem super fair because this is a backup quarterback we're talking about, a backup quarterback thrust into being the starter, going on the road against a top 10 defense and saying, okay, go win us some games. Hey, this team is going to stack the box, go out there and win us a game. You backup quarterback that the whole league said you're only worth like $2.5 million per year or something. So, it seems a little unfair, but that's just the predicament that we're in right now, where the Jaguars kind of dared Gardner Minshew to beat them. And as a result, the Colts got blown out. And that's kind of what happened in this one. I'm not saying it's all on him because the Colts offensive line could have played better. There were some mistakes by the Colts pass catchers. Again, the defense could have tightened up a little bit more in the red zone. But I think if you're looking to what really happened in this game, like why the Colts ultimately lost this game, it's the Jaguars dared Gardner Minshew to beat them. And he had one of his worst games as an NFL quarterback. We just didn't see the steady distributor that we've seen in the past. We didn't see a guy who typically takes good care of the ball. I mean, he has I think he has a 3-to-1 touchdown interception ratio in his career, or 2-to-1 at least in his career. Like typically really solid at just keeping offenses moving, getting what the offense is designed to get, and not making that big mistake. But he made so many mistakes in this one that it was just impossible for the Colts to overcome it. And we can kind of look at, I mean, again, very different situations, but if you look at the Colts versus the Rams early in the season, the Colts quarterback play at the beginning of that game was bad too. Richardson was missing a lot of passes. He had the big fumble, which hurt them on offense. But he is such a dynamic player and passer that he was able to will his team back into that game and take that game to overtime. Gardner Minshew is not that type of quarterback. He is a game flow dependent quarterback where if the Colts are getting down in the game early or they're getting blown out because he's making mistakes early, he's not the type of guy who can bring you back in the game. He can keep you ahead. He's not going to bring you back. So once those first couple turnovers happened that really flipped the script of the game, the Colts were kind of out of it. They didn't really have a chance despite the defense, again, playing fairly well and the pass catchers playing fairly well. So, yeah, I mean, I think the final score looks worse than what it is. It doesn't really say that the Colts team overall played okay, but like you just can't survive a game like that from your quarterback, whether he's a backup or not.
Yeah, looking at the output of 37 points and a 37-20 differential there, it's really surprising because, like you said, Trevor Lawrence, it was his worst game of the year. Calvin Ridley didn't kill them yet, or he didn't kill them like he did in week 1. And honestly, aside from like a minute there to start the second quarter, they honestly bottled Travis Etienne the rest of the game as well. He really only averaged 3 yards per carry in that game.
Yeah.
So aside from that, they didn't let those guys gash them. And so I just don't really see some other smoking gun as to like what happened. But I look at it and it's like all these turnovers just giving them the ball away because the defense I thought played well enough, obviously, like I mentioned. So the biggest thing I take away from that is they just kept gifting them the ball. And 2 of those were well in Jacksonville territory. So they probably would have at least got 3 on those drives. So I didn't see anything else that really like killed their chances of winning.
Yeah, again, offensive line didn't play their best game, and we've seen it kind of go throughout the year. Whenever the Colts offensive line has not played well, the Colts offense has not done well at all. So
Mm-hmm.
that kind of goes hand in hand there. But again, at the end of the day, your quarterback's making the mistakes that he was making. Again, these weren't really close plays. These were like very errant throws, like very, very errant throws, just straight to defenders. And he had a couple other dropped interceptions. I mean, he should have finished this game with 6 to 7 turnovers. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I know that was kind of the Jaguars thing was, hey, we're going to make Gardner Minshew have the ball in his hand 50 times, and odds are that he's not going to make things happen. But I don't even think they expected like, hey, we're going to have 5, 6, 7 opportunities to take away the ball with Gardner Minshew. Like I think that their game plan was we're going to make him eat the ball a lot, make the ball be in his hand, and that'll limit their explosive plays and keep things to a minimum. But instead it became, he's going to turn the ball over a ton. And maybe the Colts should have forced the issue a little bit more, the run game, and kind of just tried to lean into it to take the ball out of Minshew's hand. But look, if the game plan, if players are open, players are making some plays, ultimately the quarterback needs to get the ball out there and the quarterback needs to make the right decisions. And if the play's not there, then he has to eat it and not have that back-breaking turnover. So yeah, it sucks because again, it's a backup quarterback. You don't want to just lean into it so much being like, hey, backup, you're not supposed to be playing poorly when you're a backup quarterback. But I think when you look at the main contributor for this loss, it really is the quarterback made a lot of boneheaded decisions and a lot of hopefully decisions that he's not going to make going forward. And hopefully he can be back to being Gardner Minshew, who thrives in game flow and keeps things under control. But like you said at the top of the show, this is what they're going to get the rest of the season. They're going to be a top 10 draft pick team because you just can't survive with a quarterback like Gardner Minshew making big mistakes. You can survive with him when he's just being steady and getting the ball out and leading on the run game, leading on yards after catch. But if he's making gigantic mistakes like this, like back to back to back, like he was in this game, you just can't survive unless you have like a top tier team around him.
Now, to shift the vibes a little bit, was there anything like positive you took away from this one? Because it was oddly explosive. They had three passing plays of at least 40 yards.
Yeah, I think the overall game plan was pretty good. I mean, again, it's very similar to that second matchup with the Jaguars last year, where the Colts barely ran the ball and they leaned on Matt Ryan to like the quick passing game to be the rushing attack. In that second game, it's just Matt Ryan didn't make the mistakes that Gardner Minshew made. And I'm not saying that Gardner Minshew's worse than Ryan was last year by any means, but like I thought the game plan was solid. I think guys were open for the most part. And again, I think the defense played fairly well. Like I think they did a lot to win this game. It's just again, I don't want to keep circling back to it, but you can't survive with your quarterback doing that.
Right.
But I don't think that the final score of this game says, oh, the Colts as a team got their butts kicked by Jacksonville. They lost pretty bad, but I do think that the team game was a little bit closer than say that 21-0 beatdown last year against the Jaguars, where it felt like the sky was falling. I don't think the sky is falling from this one, but it is definitely worrisome when your quarterback plays like that. You just got to hope that if your quarterback doesn't play like that again, you can be more competitive with teams going forward.
Yeah, so a performance like that obviously has you looking at the team's warts, and we'll be taking a look at that here in a minute. What are the biggest issues facing the Colts? And it's not all just Gardner Minshew. But first, a word from our sponsors. Today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Do you ever feel like your brain is getting in its own way? Like you're trying to desperately get to sleep at night, but your brain just won't shut off? Therapy helps you figure out what's holding you back so you can work for yourself instead of against yourself. I've not personally been to therapy, so don't let me be your mental health beacon. But there's plenty that I could work on to go to therapy and everything. But if you're you're thinking of starting your own therapy journey, give BetterHelp a shot. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched up with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Make your brain your friend again with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Did the game go to a timeout? That means it's time to order with DoorDash. Is it halftime? Obviously, that means it's time to order with DoorDash. For me, that's what it was yesterday. Sitting at home watching the game halftime. I am going to order my early dinner right now. So when it comes to you and taking your sliver of a break, when you either are just sick of what's at home or you want something else, give DoorDash a call. Get 50% off up to $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. That's when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. Subject to change, terms apply.
And football season is here, and Locked On is kicking off our coverage with Locked On NFL Live. Each Friday, Locked On will go live at 2 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On NFL YouTube channel. Hosts Tanitra Batiste, Jarvis Davis, and Kyle Krabs will break down every game on the NFL slate to get you ready for this team's matchup, your fantasy lineups, your betting angles, and more. Plus, get the in-depth local analysis from our stable of NFL hosts across the country who know these teams better than anyone else. Find Locked On NFL Kickoff live every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on any Locked On NFL YouTube channel. All right, Jake, so we're getting into the biggest issues with this Colts team, and I think this is a good time to look at it because we're not quite at the halfway mark, but it feels like we're at a really big part of the season for the Indianapolis Colts where they're entering a pretty tough two-game stretch coming up, probably their toughest two-game stretch remaining of the season. With these big games against the Cleveland Browns and with the New Orleans Saints. And after that, they do enter kind of a little bit of a lull. You know, they have two teams after that. I think the next two teams after that are the Panthers and the Patriots, who are two of the worst teams in the entire league
Not
right now.
doing well.
Right. So you're going to learn a lot about this team these next 4 weeks. You know, are they going to be a team that's sitting at 5-5 still? Can they steal one against the Saints and the Browns? Can they go that direction and maybe get their way into a wild card conversation? Or do they just keep tumbling after this poor game and fall to, the bottom feeder type thing that we thought they could be before the season? But looking at this team at the macro level, Jake, what are some issues that you're looking at with this team going forward and some concerns you have when it comes to just the rest of the season projection for the Colts?
Yeah, no, I know this section of the offense is kind of a victim of circumstance, but their inability to expand on the passing game very much and not have much of a vertical threat, I think, is a pretty big issue. And that just kind of is what it is right now. With Anthony on IR, they're with a quarterback who defenses are just not scared of. They're going to load up to stop those running backs. And I mean, shoot, Alec Pierce has had a couple nice plays. You know, the tight ends have been able to do some things up the seam, but right now, I just don't think there's enough of the vertical element in the offense. And that's something they're going to keep working on. Like, they're never going to stop trying to make that happen. But I definitely think that is something that makes the offense more beatable against these opposing defenses.
Yeah. And again, it's another thing that's kind of frustrating with the offense where I don't think that the scheme is the issue with the vertical element, because you could go back to each of these weeks and say, okay, here are the couple scheme shot plays. And honestly, a good chunk of them are open. The quarterback just needs to get the ball down the field. And this is not just a Gardner Minshew thing. This was an Anthony Richardson thing the first couple weeks as well, where he just wasn't pulling the trigger on some of these downfield throws. Now you get Gardner Minshew, who just doesn't look down the field. It's just not in his DNA, unless he's throwing it to quadruple coverage, apparently. But besides that, he's not really looking down the field. So I do think that vertical element is going to be kind of missing for a good chunk of the season. It might have to be a situation where Steichen says, look, if we're going to get this 3-by-1 look, you got to throw the jump ball to the outside and just, we got to have that vertical element. I do think there were some positive signs in the second half of this past game where there were, a good 2-3 plays where receivers were wide open behind players in the secondary. And with a better ball, that's a touchdown. The Kylan Granson catch should have been a touchdown. The Michael Pittman Jr. deep ball should have been a touchdown with a slightly better ball as well. So I do think there are some good signs with the deep passing game, but yeah, you're right. It's not there yet. It's not to the level where you want it to be. And it does hurt going from an Anthony Richardson who can rip the ball down the field to a Gardner Minshew type who can't and really won't as well down the field,
Yeah, we've seen that before, and that could make for a long season. But I mean, coaching wise, again, I'm confident they'll do something schematically to overcome that. Like, I don't know what it is, but like I can't imagine a Shane Steichen offense is just going to be so boxed in, for the remainder of the offense or remainder of the season. Is there anything like defensively that you have big issues with so far?
Yeah, I think one concern that's kind of come up the last couple of weeks is, the first couple of weeks of the season, we were like, hey, you know what? The secondary is not playing well, but we kind of expected that because they're young and they're getting used to it. But this front seven is going to carry them. This front seven is going to carry them home. This front seven is playing at a top tier level. And that really high play is what's going to propel this team to having a solid defense. And we've kind of seen the front seven play fall off a little bit in recent weeks. Kwity Paye's not been as effective as he was early in the season, the last few weeks. Samson Ebukam has been playing really well, but he's kind of the biggest producer there. They're not really seeing enough from other guys up front in the pass rush. The linebacker play, I think, is tapered off just a little bit. Zaire Franklin's playing really well, but EJ Speed's impact has been a little bit less, and Shaquille Leonard's just not really doing enough on his snaps out there. So you're not seeing this front seven play at this high level. And as a result, the secondary is getting exposed a little bit more. I think Juju Brents has been a really solid addition for the team. There's been some hit and miss with his play, but for the most part, I think it's been really solid from him. But you're not getting enough from the second outside corner. Jalen Jones is doing what he can, but he is what he is. And then at safety, you're just not getting anything really from safety this season. So
yeah,
something needs to change. Something needs to change there. Like your safety play needs to get better, and your secondary play needs to get better, or your front seven needs to get back to the way they were playing in the first couple of weeks. Because if they're going to continue the trend that they're going right now with both of those things, there's just not going to be a top half of the league defense. And you kind of need that if Gardner Minshew is your starting quarterback. You can't really survive Gardner Minshew being your starter with a bottom half of the league defense.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we've seen that before. Like, it's the difference between bringing a team to the playoffs and just like totally being irrelevant is if there's a complementary defense for that quarterback. But with the safeties, I haven't studied them particularly, but like I know Julian Blackmon has done some nice things, but I can't recall pointing out Rodney Thomas really in my mind and making mental notes throughout a game like almost at all this season. And I mean, one of his big things last year was it seemed like he was always around the ball downfield. He led the team in interceptions with 4. Like I can't tell that he's making like a huge impact out there. I don't know if they need to just keep increasing Nick Cross's snaps or what they need to do, because I don't want to be unfair about it. Like, it's also, you would rather not hear his name because he's getting bombed on all the time either. But it's definitely odd considering you knew the secondary was going to be really young and like the cornerback group was totally turned over, but at least you had these experienced safeties you could be confident in.
Yeah, but they're just not playing at the level you expected. Their eye discipline's not great. They're not reading routes super well. They're playing a little too conservative. Like Rodney Thomas had the issue last year where he would sit a little too deep too often and allow things over the middle way too often. And now we're kind of seeing that even more this year. It's like you want to see that second year step forward, but it's kind of been a step backwards or just kind of the same step to the side. So you just want to see more growth from the safeties. And it's a little concerning that of all the defenders that played 100% of their team snaps this year, the Colts have 2 of them, both of their safeties, when neither of them are really playing that well. So it's like maybe get Nick Cross out there a little bit more, maybe do some different things, but we'll see. We'll see what happens going forward. Obviously, something's going to have to break here. Either they're going to take that step forward or the Colts defense is going to have the bottom fall out of them. So we'll see the rest of the year. But coming up, guys, we're going to talk about the Colts' chances at making the playoffs. Obviously, their chances to win the division really took a big hit this past weekend, but do they still have a shot at the playoffs going forward? We're going to discuss that all coming up in a second. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sport, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you'll have. I personally love Gametime, guys, because I'm a big concert guy. I go to a lot of punk concerts, a lot of punk shows and stuff like that. So Gametime just has the greatest tickets for me. I get to find great pictures of where I'm going to be sitting before the show. I can see kind of what the vibe is like, where it is. If I want to go down to the mosh at all during the show at all, like Gametime has me set up perfectly. Gametime is just the easy choice, and they have the lowest price guarantee, so they can just match deals and make things perfect for me. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're set. Tickets are sent directly to your phone so you never have to dig through your email. Snag the tickets without stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Jake. So we're getting into the playoff conversation. Obviously, it's so early in the season to talk playoff because, look, last year at this point, the Colts were 3-2-1, and some people were still feeling pretty optimistic. I was tuned out after the blank in Jacksonville last year, but some people were so optimistic that, hey, this could have been a playoff team last year. But then we saw the bottom just completely drop out of that Colts team last season. Now, what kind of favors them a little bit this year is they have, presumably, they're going to have the same coach the whole year. They're not going to have an ESPN analyst come in and coach them halfway through the year, which is a big plus. And they have a fairly favorable schedule. I mean, Cleveland and New Orleans coming up are pretty tough. Like that's a tough set of defenses that you're playing there. Then you get some competitive games there with Tampa, Tennessee, and Cincinnati. But then you get Carolina, New England, again, Pittsburgh, Atlanta, Vegas, Houston. Like these are all very, very winnable games. It just depends what Colts team we're getting. Are we going to get the Colts team that could beat the Baltimore Ravens on the road? Are we getting the Colts team that finally got over the hump and beat the Tennessee Titans? Or are we going to get the Colts team that got their butts kicked in the first half against the Rams, or the Colts team that just could not do anything against Jacksonville in their 2 matchups against them? Which Colts team are we getting? But I do know that, if you're looking at playoff percentage odds and stuff, the Colts percentage dropped quite a bit with this past loss. I think according to Pro Football Focus's metric, where they lost like 20% off their odds to make the playoffs with this past loss, because again, it's early, it's not over yet, but they are in the back seat now when it comes to winning the division. They're kind of not out of that race, but they're really behind in that race right now. But Jake, what do you think? Do you think the Colts can make the playoffs? Do you think Gardner Minshew can lead this team into the promised land this season?
So I thought Sunday was going to be a big statement game in terms of their chances of winning the division. I thought that was probably going to be one they were going to need to have if they were going to ultimately win the South. With that said, I'm not going to totally rule out them winning the South, but it seems pretty unlikely.
Yeah.
Now, that means they're going to have to turn their hopes to a wild card berth. And because of that schedule, it's not a gauntlet. It's not terrible. There's no big scary games. I mean, Cincinnati could be absolutely rolling by that point, but let's say Anthony does come back later in the season. You finish off with Atlanta, Las Vegas, and Houston in your final 3 games. That's kind of doable. That's a nice final 3-game push. But ultimately, I think this team is just going to be the type that they're going to probably beat the teams that they're favored to beat and then fall short in the rest of them.
Yeah.
Which is ultimately going to land them around 500, whether that's 9-8 or 8-9, whatever. I don't know. However, that's going to look in the AFC playoff picture. Ultimately, it feels like that might have them falling short. But I'm not going to totally rule them out. Like, if they can find a way to work around their issues in the passing game and become more balanced, then I think they can do it, because I think their defense is fine enough. Like, this team is just altogether fine enough. I didn't even think they would be a playoff team coming into it.
Mm-hmm.
But I looking at the schedule, I can't rule it out. Like, I think they're a competitive, decent team.
Yeah, they're a well-coached, young, energetic, fiery team that can beat anybody, but they're going to be limited because of who they have at quarterback now and some other limitations when it comes to just the roster construction and overall weaknesses. But they are a team that can beat everyone left on their schedule. I mean, Jacksonville was the biggest test left. I mean, again, it depends on what team that Cincinnati is in the later half of the season. If they're playing like they were against the Cardinals a couple weeks ago, then obviously you're not winning that game. But Cincinnati's kind of been a mess. But outside of that, these are all winnable games. The Colts can be competitive. They're just so game flow dependent now. You know, it really comes down to what type of game the Colts are in for them to have a chance at any of these. You know, like even Cleveland this next week, you know, Cleveland has the best defense in football, or a top 2 defense in football, wherever you want to say with that. If the Colts just keep this like a 3-0 game or a 6-3 game or something going to the fourth, though, like a really tight game, and they play that slugfest that you need, they can easily beat Cleveland. They could do that against the
without their quarterback, which could be huge.
Yeah, they can do that against the Saints as well. And Carolina and New England, they should be able to beat with just Gardner Minshew, because those two teams are in really bad places right now. But, you know, you're so limited with your quarterback right now, because this is a backup caliber quarterback who limits the type of offense that you can run. So if you get into games where you're down 7-0 early, you're down 10-0 early, you're probably not going to win those games because you just don't have the firepower on offense. You don't have the high level skill position players to kind of make up for Gardner Minshew being your quarterback. So I do think, like you said, I think they can get to 10 wins if everything goes right and they stay ahead of game flow and they keep everything manageable. But I think realistically, you're probably looking at like 7 to 8 wins on the year, which, again, before the season, if you told me Richardson was going to play 2 games or 2.5 games, maybe, or whatever it ends up being, 5 games this year, and the Colts were going to win 7 in Shane Steichen's debut season after coming off a 4-win season, I'd say, you know what? I'll take it. I don't want Richardson being hurt, but I'll take it. So you got to just live with these things in perspective. I'm not counting the Colts out completely for the rest of the year, but I do think a 7, 8, 9 win season is still a step in the right direction, considering what lows they were coming from last year. But obviously you are disappointed because we were riding such a high into that Jacksonville Jaguars game this week, coming off of that, you know, finally beating the Titans and really dominating the Titans for most of that game, finally getting over that hump, and then just crashing down against the Jacksonville Jaguars in Jacksonville. Couldn't beat that one. And obviously not having your quarterback for that game. It does kind of take a little bit of a blow there, but I do think that the rest of the schedule is manageable. They're a well-coached team. They can win these games. It's just, what kind of Gardner Minshew are you getting? Are you getting the game-controlling type of Gardner Minshew? Or are you getting the brain-dead Minshew that we got this past weekend? You know, like what kind of Minshew are you getting? That's going to determine what the Colts do the rest of the season.
Yeah, that'll be big, because, again, taking care of the ball, like, never was that more evident of how critical it is than on Sunday. Because, again, I don't know if they would have won, but without all 4 of those turnovers, that game does not look at all like it does in the final score. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. But my final thought on the playoff thing, I'm looking at 2 sections here consecutively. So if they can win either one of the Cleveland or New Orleans games, I think that would be good. Like, by no means do they need to sweep that. But then Carolina, New England, and Tampa. Now, New England is in Germany, so, like, the Colts have historically not done well in those overseas games, but they need to come out of that 3-game stretch with 2 wins. Doesn't matter which of the opponents it's against, but Carolina, New England, and Tampa, if they come out of that 1-2 and 0-3, like, that's going to be a critical hit on the playoff chances.
They need to be at least 6-4 going into Tennessee to have a chance at the playoffs. So they're not at 6-4 at that point. Like, if they're at 5-5 or 4-6, yeah, you're probably not making the playoffs at that point. You got to at least be 6-4 going into Tennessee, which they very well can. It's just, again, what kind of Gardner Minshew we getting the rest of the
Right.
season, and can the rest of this team propel him forward to victory? Guys, we're going to be continuing this conversation all week here on Locked On Colts. So every day is, again, make sure you have those notifications turned on for the early mornings for all your Locked On Colts needs. And if you guys don't already, follow at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter. Also subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. We'd love your guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll see you guys back here bright and early tomorrow morning.